right. Welcome back, everybody, to another future-focused weekly update where hopefully I'm doing my job of keeping you 10 steps ahead of what's happening at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. I look forward to the topics I've got today. Thanks, everybody, first of all, for those of you who watch, listen, however you end up consuming this. I appreciate it and the many conversations that I have in response to it. So continue responding, engaging, sending me things along the way. I always appreciate it. And do all those social things you're supposed to do if you find value in this. Like, share, subscribe, whatever it is that you feel so comfortable with. So today I've got my list of things. What's funny is I actually spent quite a bit of time last night having to refine it. And I went, geez Louise, I've got a lot of stuff I want to talk about. But I'm picking 4 that I think are the most significant, that I have the most to say on, that I think will have the most benefit for everybody. I'm going to kind of go in a unique order in this because I've got a few that'll probably, make people bristle, few that are just to some major tech advancement updates that I want to make sure everybody's aware of and understand the implications of it. But like always, my goal in this is not to, fuel the hype cycle, to send people into a tailspin, to irritate or, make people mad about what's going on. There's plenty of that stuff out there. My goal is just to help you think critically about what this is and hopefully offer a thoughtful perspective that might be one you haven't picked up somewhere else. Because I tend to, I find I always end up looking at things through a lens that other people don't. And that can be a very good thing. It can also be very problematic sometimes. So with that, let's jump into it. So the first one was this video that I watched. You can find out more if you'd really like, but Google Gemini, well, Google in particular, Alphabet, the parent company, but Google, they are really going hard with this Gemini humanoid robotics breakthrough. And they've made some very significant advancements in what I would call general intelligence for robotics. Now, if you watched my predictions episode for 2025, if you haven't, go back and watch it. But if you watched it, you'll see that one of the things I have in there is some major advancements in humanoid robotics, and where we're going to start to see the intersection of AI and robotics come together. And this is one of those. So once again, just like last week, we're only in March, and some of these advancements are already hitting pretty hard. And what was unique about this was, so I watched the video of how their robots are learning and how Gemini is using these different things to accomplish what we often take for granted. So as an example, they were showing one of the engineers asking it to put a banana in a clear bin, but then they would move the bin as they would, the machine would try and pick up a banana and put it in, which sounds like such a small thing, because you would go, what's the big deal with that? Haven't robots been putting things, sorting things into a thing for a long time? Yes. And when you think about what it takes for it to not only recognize the original target it was supposed to put the thing in moved, but then to predict where that movement would be, and to watch it play almost this game of cat and mouse of, okay, now I'm moving it over here, and it stops, pivots, moves, and does it in near real time. We don't realize, I think, many times how powerful our brains are and what we do, and things that we just don't think twice about. Something falls off the counter, we just don't even think to reach over without looking and grab it. That takes massive, massive amounts of brain power and complex general thinking that our bodies just do with little to no. We don't even have to think consciously about it. We just react and it happens. And so now these AI models are getting to a point where, as they move into multimodal territory and create new data about how things get done, we can start to train these things on this broad spectrum of data. And Google's really going firm with this. Now, I actually had another update that I keep bumping around that maybe I'll focus specifically on it depending on what happens. But Figure AI is another big humanoids robotic partner, and they are already saying they're planning on having consumer grade robots to help you around the house by later this year. And they're actually breaking away from some of the other big models, and they've created their own. Probably my guess is largely because a lot of the other big players have focused on language and language data, not necessarily contextual, real world data. And that's something that's a lot harder to capture. So of course, a robotics company is going to have more access to that. It would be easier for them to build a model capable of doing that better. But now Google's getting in the space. So clearly they haven't been sitting around waiting on this, because now their robotics are actually starting to do some of these general intelligence, which is its ability to, I just gave the example. Now, what's interesting about this is I fully anticipate we are going to see robotics start to explode on the scene here soon. Now, lest you freak out and think, oh my gosh, this means, there's going to be robots walking all over by the end of the year. I don't think we're going to see it move that quick. I think there's still a lot of risk that has to be mitigated. These models are still not necessarily, in very contained real world environments. They do fairly well. If you think about some of the things that we're seeing in military robotics, some of the risk is less. People aren't as worried about the risks. Not to say that the military doesn't worry about collateral damage. They do, but not the same way. Let's say if you're an office CEO and you're like, okay, well, if we have robots walking around the office, it'd be really, really bad if one of those robots like severely injured someone because it malfunctioned. It would cause absolute chaos. We'd have to do away with our entire investment. In the military, if a humanoid robot accidentally, friendly fires somebody or hits a civilian, it's just not going to be taken as seriously because it's kind of considered, well, that's the cost of warfare. So that's why I say I don't think we're just going to suddenly start seeing robots popping up all over the place, but this space is moving ridiculously fast. And I do think we are going to start to see consumer robotics this year. I do think we are going to start to see those pop up. I think the costs are going to start to come down. They're finding ways to make them vastly more efficient through electronic motors versus the big hydraulic systems that historically they've relied on, that are very heavy, very hard to take care of, have a lot of issues with them. For anybody who's ever worked on hydraulic systems, I used to do construction, and they're a maintenance nightmare to deal with this stuff. They're great when they work, but when they don't, it's a real problem. And so these electronic motors are reducing the footprint, the risk associated with it, because instead of these big, powerful hydraulic systems, they can do it in smaller, less dangerous systems. So we're starting to see that. But now this week, the one I really wanted to focus on was Google has really made some progress in the AI models, which will now allow these things to operate much more human-like than a robot. And the example I shared, if you go look it up, I can't remember. I think it's AI Grid is one of the YouTube channels I follow that went through this, and they did a breakdown on it. It's very interesting to watch. Now, granted, it's two arms on the end of a table. So you still have a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. Just because I don't know a lot of people whose houses have just a table where they can have two robotic arms set up and have it do things. But you can start to see the potential for, if you were to train something like that on cooking, there's a real world where it isn't that far out to think that you could have an AI trained robot in your kitchen preparing meals very easily. To me, that's something that is extremely practical and something that wouldn't be that hard. I can see some of these households, and I'm just thinking as a dad of 8 and husband, some of the just practical stuff, washing dishes, sorting cabinets, going through and rearranging. I mean, who likes to rearrange their spice rack or their cereal cabinet to make sure that nothing's expired and the boxes are all wet? These are real world activities that a robot could probably do fairly well today with some of these things, and do it with the kind of general intelligence that if your kid jumped in front of the cabinet, the robot's not going to just, jam its hands into the kid's face, because it can now detect what's going on and adapt in real time. If it's cooking food on a counter and suddenly your kid puts their hand on the counter, it's not going to take the knife and chop off their fingers, because it'll be able to detect that, hey, something changed. I need to pivot course, which sound like very basic things, but to a robot, that is very complicated. That is a lot of advanced general intelligence that they have to be able to make those kind of decisions and recognize that. But you can also start to see, as I'm describing this, why there's a lot of risk that these companies have to consider as they think about, all right, before we sell a consumer grade robot into somebody's house, we have to make sure it can handle and think about all these distractions. What happens when the cat jumps up on the counter and walks across? Like, does it know what to do with that? Does it know that the cat didn't become an ingredient in your recipe? Does it know that it needs to now sanitize, the counter because there's cat hair? Like, how does it start to think about some of those things? Now, granted, people aren't perfect either, but there's so much stuff that we just do intuitively because we have such general intelligence that a robot just doesn't have. But this breakthrough with Google's Geminis is starting to show how much further we are coming with this. The days of, well, we can train a humanoid robot to literally pick up one panel, move it, place it on a thing, put the same things in, and it can really only do very repeatable, consistent tasks. Watching this video of Google Gemini's new robotics breakthroughs is proving that that's not necessarily the case at all. And we are not far off from being able to do far more than that. Now, one of the things that comes up with this that was really interesting, I was talking with my kids about it last night, was, doesn't this further disrupt people's identity in terms of oh gosh, what makes us human and all this other stuff? And we happened to watch this video from, I can't remember what it was. It's called Kierkegaard, something like that. It's European, the name of the channel, but they do these animated videos, and they were talking about how you actually aren't experiencing reality, you're experiencing your mind's prediction of what reality is. And it was just talking about all the way our senses detect and predict and all this stuff that we just take for granted, which if you want to understand the complexity of what these AIs have to learn and how wonderfully complex we are as human beings, just go look up that video. They just dropped it this week. It'll make your head spin. You'll feel a little dizzy after you watch it, I promise. But what was really unique is as they broke this whole thing down, they got to the end of it, and their whole point with it was, so does this just mean we're nothing but a bunch of, neural synapses and electronic whatever? And could we ultimately just replicate all? They didn't get into that, but that was the discussion I had with my kids is, well, couldn't we just replicate all these things and essentially create a human being? But it was interesting because at the end, even they acknowledged no, because there is something unique about human consciousness. Now, they don't subscribe to my worldview, so for them, they just kind of stopped there and were like, we don't know what it is, but we just know it's there. So for me, it's very much I firmly believe I do know what that is and what contributes to that. So no matter how advanced these models get, we're not creating a human being. Even if we can get it to replicate all of the activities of a human being, even if we can get it to learn all the things a human could theoretically learn, we still are not creating a human. But what we're starting to see is some of these advanced capabilities are going to very, very, very much mimic and mirror a robot or a human in ways that we just can't fully predict at this point. But it's going to be very interesting to watch. And I stand firm. I said I'd throw updates in along the way just to kind of let you know how things are progressing on my predictions. And advanced robotics, for sure, this year is going to be a major, major one. And my next tech update, which I'm going to skip, or I'm going to go to another one and then I'll come back to it, you're going to see how they're going to get more of this data. Because one of the biggest limitations on these humanoid robotic AI models is the general contextual training data they need to be able to, how do you know what are all the possibilities of what could happen, and how do you get it to predict and move and adjust based on those things? Well, you got to have that data somewhere, and that data historically is not on the internet. So how do you get it? So stay tuned for that one, because I'll talk more about that in a minute. But let's transition on to the second one. And again, I'm going to talk about this one through a different lens. So if, as I start to talk about it, you feel your hair on the back of your neck standing up. Calm down. But as I was looking through my updates and kind of reprioritizing them last night before recording this, I noticed that, a federal judge now is reversing a lot of they're calling them firings. I don't think they're firings. I would consider them reductions in forces, but whatever. We're talking terminology of federal workers. So there's something like 25,000 people now that, the federal judge is reversing this kind of thing. And so, of course, you've got all the political rhetoric of people arguing on there. That's not even at all what I want to get into on this. I want to talk about this more from a general standpoint, because this is going to, I think, affect a lot of things in the world of work that people need to be considerate of. And so I'll approach this from a couple different angles. The first one is specifically to employees, who may be wrestling with a lot of the uncertainty that's going on right now and going, oh my gosh, because this isn't limited to what's happening with the federal government and Doge. This is happening in companies everywhere right now. Every day I go on LinkedIn and see all these companies laying off mass swaths of their people. And I talk to people on a regular basis who are worried about the company they're at, yet they're terrified to go somewhere else because they're worried that the same thing's going to happen at that company. And they have good reason for it. I think what you can take from this situation, though, is one, a lot of this stuff is out of your control. So stressing and being anxious about it is not going to do anything for you. And if anything, when I've worked with and coached people over the years, the stress and anxiety that comes from being afraid of, well, what if I lose my job? What if this? What if that? And sometimes even very legitimately, let's say you're one of these federal workers who got riffed and now it's all being reversed. And so all that anxiety, all that stress, all that stuff you committed, which actually it did drag you down, not only in your work, but in your family life and all these other things. It dragged you through the mud only to have it come full circle and reverse. And the same thing happens. Maybe companies might not call you back after they lay you off and go, oh my gosh, Christopher, please, can you come back? But you do get to a point where you find a new job, you figure things out, things move forward. And suddenly you realize, man, I really put myself through the ringer on this. I know somebody personally who, went through this. They lost their job, kind of had one of these overwhelming, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Went out and spun up a bunch of stuff. And then they landed a job shortly after and now are wrestling through the complexity of, oh gosh, I have all these commitments that I just signed up for in a panic that I now have to follow through on or figure out how to get out of. And now they have the stress of this on top of starting a new job. So I say that because to employees or people who are stressed and anxious about this, take a deep breath and know, yes, it's out of your control, but honestly, most of this stuff, time and time again, I've seen it, does work itself out in some fashion. Now, I don't hide my worldview. So where that comes from is not just, oh, it'll be okay. I'm not going to get into what all that is. But what I can tell you is I've seen it enough. I don't need to pull on my worldview. I can talk from just natural law to say, I've seen this work itself out more times than not. And when it doesn't, a lot of times my pushback is, I think you need to look in the mirror, because the reason you're not moving forward is you're the one holding yourself back. That's not always the case. So don't say, oh, so Christopher, you're saying anybody who doesn't struggles, it's their own fault. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is 99% of the time, it works itself out. Maybe not in ways you expect, maybe not in, things that you would have planned, but it does. And when you panic and freak out, you make the situation worse. So as I was looking at this, it was a little like I feel for a lot of these workers who probably panicked, freaked out, did all sorts of crazy stuff, might have burned some major bridges. I know somebody recently who had an employee who had a really bad day and they made some stupid decisions and then they tried to come back from it. And it was like, you can't do that. You can't do what you just did and then go, oops, I had a bad day, and expect a company to take you back. So amidst all this uncertainty, my call to employees is to try and just take a deep breath, step back, find somebody you can talk to, to help work through this and process it, but don't make stupid decisions because they will come back to bite you big time. And a lot of times this stuff might even, like in this case, be completely reversed. And it happens in companies all the time. We're going to do this. And then they don't really ever do it. So let things play out and see how they go before you freak out. Now, here's the part that to leaders I would speak who are in these decisions, who are thinking about this, because one of the most frustrating parts about watching not just the federal cuts, but company cuts and all this other stuff is not that there's cuts. People all the time say, well, Christopher, you just don't think anybody should ever be cut. And I'm like, that's not actually true at all. I've had to make plenty of cuts to my teams over the years. The challenge is oftentimes when I see cuts, they are not made with critical thought and surgical precision. They're just made based off gut assumptions and wild, just, yeah, okay, that sounds good. Let's do this. And then we see things like this where it's like, okay, you went through the effort of getting rid of all these people, completely like destroying, sending the nation into a complete tailspin. You created all this uproar. You probably destroyed, like it's possible you ruined some of these people's lives only to then come back and go, well, never mind. Like here's your job back. And even if you give them their job back, you can't recover from that. And that's one of the things that I think if you ever find yourself in this situation as an employee, you really got to weigh that carefully. And as if you're a leader, even if you make a mistake, you may have to now follow through with your mistake, own it, and move forward and suffer the consequences, because you can't just undo these things and say, whoops, let's just bring everybody back, because the consequences are real. Now, is it possible you could reverse something like this, take full ownership of it, take full responsibility, try and rebuild trust with the people that do come back? In theory, yes. It's going to be a lot of work and it's going to take a lot of eating crow. You're going to be so full on crow, you're probably going to gain 100 pounds. But it can be done, but you got to recognize there's some real damage to be done. And what many people don't take into account on this is that when you make these rash decisions, and I've been in the room with some of the financials behind this, it's not a cost-saving exercise. People think it is. You hear, and so if you're not somebody who's been involved with some of these things, it's very easy to think that, oh, well, by cutting people, you're reducing costs. Actually, usually you're not. And even businesses who can show on paper, yeah, we are, because see, we reduce this amount of headcount. Even by the time we pay this, we'll recoup these costs by X number of years. They're not taking into account the collateral damage to the culture and the performance of the organization. They're not taking into account the cost of rehiring. They're not taking into account the loss of intellectual capital that went with it. They're not taking it, like there are serious consequences that come from wide scale layoffs. And so I think my message to leaders is be really, like, I understand there are times there's no choice. I was working with somebody not that long ago where things had shifted, and the challenge was I had to work with them on taking responsibility for it, because really they put themselves in this position because they got greedy and foolish, and their pride got the best of them, and they grew too fast into an area that they weren't really thinking clearly and they weren't looking ahead. And so when it didn't go according to their projections, they truly were in a position where it was like, what you're talking about is not sustainable. Like you have to cut. So I appreciate and recognize there are times you have to do that. And the longer you go without doing the surgical precision cuts, the more likely you are to have to do one of these big things. Because if you do it surgically, there's a good chance you can do it through attrition. You can repurpose people. You can move things around. You actually can do it in a lot of really ways. Now, if you wait until you're over bloated and 600 pounds overweight, I mean, there's not really a whole lot you can do. So don't let yourself get to that point. But as you start moving through this, mass scale layoffs should truly be your last resort. They really should. And that's not me just going, oh, well, it's the right thing to do. No, it's actually the best thing to do from a business standpoint as well. It's best for everyone. So yes, I'm going to advocate on behalf of the employees who you're ruining people's lives. I mean, like I said, they will get over it. They will move on. And it's easy to tell yourself that. So you justify layoffs. But it is one of the most traumatic events you can put people through. And so to knowingly do that without putting a lot of thought and care and time into considering that is reckless, is absolutely reckless. So not only am I going to advocate it from that standpoint, but I'm also going to advocate it from the standpoint of it's not in the best interest of your business. It truly is not. It is going to inhibit your growth. It is going to cost you more financially in the long run. It really will, even just on numbers alone. And you are going to lose big time in here. Now, some people might go, well, but I've seen companies do it and they recover. They recover, but recover to what? Sure, they're still there. If they're a big enough player, they may still remain a big player, but you don't really know the opportunity cost that people have missed. And that's the part that I see a lot of times where I go, you could have been here. You could have actually been way up here. Yeah, you recovered. And so you're here and you go, well, here's pretty darn good. And it's like, I mean, I guess if you're fine with taking 6th place, but you could have been in 1st. So is that really your attitude? Would you really rather say, yeah, but like I'm good with 6th? I just don't know many senior executives that would publicly say that's what they're really trying to do. And I know that's not what many leaders actually want to do. So that's where I would just challenge, don't take 6th. You can take 1st. There's ways to do it. I've helped major companies go through this and go through impossible things where they go, there's just no way. There's no way we can afford this. There's no way we can survive this. It's like, actually there is. There's a way we can do this that doesn't lead to the chaos. So if you're in that position, if you're feeling that way, seek help. Call me if you need to. But truly, there is a way to do better so you don't end up having to do the collateral damage on this stuff is just, it's insane and it's unnecessary. Okay, so shifting back to tech, let's talk about Meta's new Aria 2 glasses. If you haven't seen these things, they're pretty cool. Would I ever wear a pair? I don't know. You tell me what you think, if I could pull off glasses. I don't know, maybe it'd work with the no hair and the beard thing. I'm not sure, but that's not my point. My point is these things are very powerful and they're not, if you followed me for long, you know that I've talked about when it comes to immersive technology and wearables, the hardware space has needed to make some major advancements. And this is the Aria 2 in my mind is we're starting to see this reach a level of maturity where there's practical application, there's real value to the user, and there's tremendous benefit to the technology companies. So will this, are we going to see everybody walking around with Meta Aria 2s? I doubt it, unless they make them a lot more stylish and a lot more flavors, but they're powerful. And what's really interesting about these is not only, so from a user experience standpoint, now you have this powerful AI, attached to your head with glasses that don't interrupt your vision, that allow you to, interact and be able to see and interact with things without plopping a big, set of goggles on your face that makes your neck sore and makes you disconnect from reality. But on top of that, it has some real practical uses in terms of what you can do, direct access to your AI models so you can interact with it as needed. It can see your environment. There are tons of sensors on this thing to be able to pick up, everything that's going on, to be able to provide real-time feedback, to be able to capture some of this stuff, be able to then use your AI to, document, dictate all of this stuff, give you things that you can pull back to. It's a little bit creepy, I guess would be the best way I could say it when you really think about what this is. I mean, this is like sending basically a sniffing device, everywhere you go to capture and, suck in basically all the data from everything around you, which as I was watching this, I'm like, oof, this is going to start treading into some privacy privacy concerns real quick. Because let's say I put on a pair of glasses that is listening to everything going on around me, literally capturing video of everything I'm doing. Is detecting, has sensors detecting everything going on around me. Like all this stuff. I'm like, not everybody's going to consent to this. And I have a sneaking suspicion outside of the US, you're not going to be seeing anybody wearing these things in public. In the US, maybe, but even that's going to get stripped back really quick, because when it comes to consent, this gets really, really dicey. So this is where it's going to be interesting to see how these things start to play out, because you already run into it a little bit with people using phones and capturing video, and you see this with influencers where they got to be careful how much they're walking around with their phone just recording everything as they're blogging something that they're then going to play out to millions of viewers. Because if something they capture is something personal or something, and somebody goes, hey, whoa, yeah, I didn't consent to you to sharing this video of, oh, you saw me and you videoed my engagement. That was my engagement. Like, I didn't say you could video that and put it on your YouTube channel. So you've got that, but that's a phone. That's like more, somebody's doing it. So you can see somebody with a phone and kind of, hey, I'm going to stay out of their line of sight. Somebody walking around with a pair of glasses, and while these glasses still, it's pretty obvious they're not just normal glasses, they look much more like it. So it's going to become much more difficult to detect when are you being monitored and seen and observed and consumed for the sake of training AI models and all of this other stuff. And, there's not going to be a nice opt-out thing that you're going to be able to just check. And so this is going to start treading into some really unique territory. Now, I think about the Meta Aria 2s. I can see if you're in a dev environment where, and this is going back to my earlier point about humanoid robotics, I'm already seeing why they want this stuff. I guarantee Meta would love it if absolutely, they'd probably give these things away for free if they could afford, if they actually believed people would wear it. If they could convince people to wear these things everywhere, I guarantee Meta would hand them out to you for free, because the amount of data they could capture to train their contextual general intelligence robot models would be incredible. Because really, these things have sensors just like a human body. It can detect, it's got a gyroscope, it's got, sensors detecting everything going on around them. It's audibly detecting, how are people responding in these environments and what's everything that's happening. People are then interacting with it like they're talking to another person. So this is massive, massive, massive amounts of data. And I think we're going to see big tech companies trying to push these kinds of things. I mean, we have phones in our pockets now that we know are capturing massive amounts of data, but nowhere near what something like this would do. And then it gets into the territory of, well, what really is consent? Is it the consent of the person wearing them? Is it everyone they capture? Because you might be able to do that in a work environment. Let's say you work for Meta and you're one of their engineers, and they tell you to wear these things at work. And basically, by just being an employee of Meta and at Meta's campus, they have the right to say, hey, if we capture you and we're monitoring all this stuff as part of our training data, that's just part of working for us. You start asking consumers to take that out into the real world, you're starting to play in some very, very, very dangerous privacy lines. And it's going to be interesting to see how it proceeds. And I think that's going to probably be one of the biggest barriers to this kind of stuff, because I would be hesitant about, even though I think they're cool and I think it'd be fun to mess around with them and just see how well they work and how helpful they can be. Even I would be a little like, I don't really need something that's tracking and sensing everything I do all the time. Like, there's just too much there. But this is going to become where we're starting to head. These things are becoming much more practical and usable and a benefit to the consumer, the company itself, and then the company who makes the tech, where once you get that trifecta, that's where things start to pick up and you start to see things move in ways that you thought, oh, nobody's ever going to walk around with, that. Really? I would disagree. I mean, people thought, Apple Watches were just never going to take off. Well, then all of a sudden they kind of perfected that trifecta, and pretty soon everybody's got an Apple Watch on their wrist, type of a thing. That's the kind of moves that we're seeing. So I think we still got a ways to go. Like I said, I think there's some major barriers we're going to have to cross before you start seeing people with Aria glasses on their face in public. But I think by the end of the year, we're probably going to start to see some of this stuff hit in the mainstream and all that. So keep an eye out. And if you see anybody wearing wonky, square, unusually large glasses, just maybe cross to the other side of the street if you don't want to be part of their training data. So we'll see. But on the plus side, this kind of stuff could really help advance some of these robotic general intelligence situations that I talked about before. All right. So last one, and I kept this one for last because, everybody may be in a position where they just aren't in a state of mind to handle this kind of stuff. But again, I want to address it, but through a different lens. So, and this isn't, I'm just trying to think how best to frame this up. Elon Musk posted retweeted, I'll be clear, he didn't post, he retweeted a really, really inappropriate tweet. Okay. And I won't even repeat the tweet here because if you don't know what it is, you can just look Musk's deleted retweet and you can look it up for yourself. That, of course, has taken the internet by storm, and it's causing all sorts of things, and people have all sorts of takes and all sorts of opinions on it. And so let me start by saying everything about the tweet and just the very act of retweeting it, I hate. Okay. I don't care who it is. It's not, I get the comments and the messages. Oh, you just don't like Elon Musk. No, that's not, I don't know Elon Musk. I don't know what really goes through his head. I don't really know how he thinks. And as much as everybody thinks they know what goes through it, I don't really know who he is or how he thinks about things. Okay. The act itself. And that's where I tend to focus my effort on behaviors. I really don't like to assess or put myself in a position to judge somebody's heart. I truly feel like that's God's place to do it, but I will speak out on behaviors. And so that's where I will say the behavior, if we just want to look at the behavior of retweeting what this tweet said, there's no redeemable response to it that anybody could ever go, well, but there's not. But that's not why I want to talk about it. Okay. But I wanted to just get that clear because I inevitably get the people who misunderstand what I'm saying and they think I'm trying to be divisive or political or stir up stuff. And I'm not. But as I read what the tweet said, I actually was more concerned about what it says about the state of leadership and kind of the trend we're on around leadership right now. So yes, I hate what the specific tweet was about and what it had to do with and the impact that it has and some of the things that can be conclusions that can be drawn from retweeting that thing. But what bothered me a lot was the state of what it says about how leaders think. And without repeating the tweet, essentially it was saying some people who did some really terrible things, they aren't the ones that did it. It was the people working for them that did it. All right. So that's the gist of the tweet. You can probably start to piece together what the tweet was about. But what really bothers me about that is it speaks to a systemic problem that I see in leadership all the time. And it is a major problem that is wreaking havoc. And this message is to leaders, but also to just other people who will be leaders at some point. I mean, everybody's a leader at some, you're a leader in something. But my point is, as you step into bigger and bigger leadership roles, this kind of thinking is what will destroy you and everyone around you. And what I'm talking about is this idea that as a leader, you aren't really accountable for what your people do. And that to me is what the heart of the tweet was saying is, yeah, well, it's not really the leader's fault that this stuff happened. It's the people that actually carried it out. If so-and-so had actually been the one pulling the trigger or hitting the button, yeah, then okay, maybe I would say it was them, but they didn't. They were off in their office in this country or over here. It was their people that did it. It's not their fault. And it speaks to this mentality around leadership that you aren't really responsible for what your people do. You are not accountable. You're literally only accountable for the very actions you specifically take. And that just isn't true. And this is a major problem. When leadership gets disconnected from accountability, it goes really, really wrong, really, really, really fast. And I have seen this time and time and time and time again. And we're currently on this trend where there is even more of an emphasis that leaders can do what leaders want to do. And as long as they're not the ones technically doing the bad things, then they're not really responsible for it. And that's just not true, and it's not healthy, and it's not productive. Now, before everybody blows up my inbox with all sorts of nonsense that you can't control other people. And Christopher, I've heard you say you can't control other people. Yes, I know. Okay. I am not suggesting that as a leader, you are now responsible for every single thing that somebody else does under your watch. That is not what I mean. And trying to frame it up as that's your excuse for not taking what I'm saying seriously is a cop-out. It's a cheap cop-out, and don't do that. That's not what I mean. That's not what I'm talking about. And the reason people get uncomfortable with this is it's really hard to look in the mirror and recognize the bad stuff has probably happened at your direction, even though you didn't necessarily pull the trigger on it. And when you start to wrestle with that, you start to not feel so great about yourself, and you start to go, oof. And so our natural response is to go, well, it's not, I didn't say it, I didn't make them do it. I just, they chose that path. And are there instances where people literally go against your direct orders, or, you say, hey, this is how we treat people. And people go, well, I'm not going to do it that way. Fine. You're not responsible for that. But if they did that, and then you just kind of look the other way and go, well, I don't really want to deal with that because that's kind of like, difficult and uncomfortable, and they're kind of a hard person. I'm not really a conflict person. I'm more of a peacemaker, peacekeeper. No, then you now are part of that. You now are part of that. And so we need to start seeing a shift back to leaders being held accountable and leaders holding themselves accountable for the way they lead people, the things they say, the direction that they send people, the values that they hold people to. You are accountable for that as a leader. And you don't get to just go, well, I said this, but I don't model it, so I'm good, right? Because I said it. It's like, no, if you're behaving the opposite, you are literally communicating to the people underneath you. I know we say this, but this is really how we do it. And then when they follow your lead and you go, wow, hey, did you not get the PowerPoint I sent where I said, don't do that? You have a hand in that responsibility. Now, that can feel overwhelming. And this is why I tell people who go, I want to be in leadership. I'm like, be careful. Because when I talk to people about what real leadership means and the accountability that comes with it, people are usually not quite as eager to get into leadership. People are eager to get into leadership when they think I can do whatever I want. And, hey, if things go bad, it's not my fault if it wasn't technically me. I just got to keep myself clean. Like, no, actually, you're accountable for what your people do. And you should be held responsible for that. And unless it can be shown that you did everything possible, you know what I mean? Like as much as humanly possible to make sure that you're setting expectations to go the other way and you're modeling that, you should be held accountable for those kinds of things in some capacity. Now, does it mean you get, hung out to dry or fired just because something bad happened under your watch? No, that's not reasonable, which is, again, that's usually the reaction I get to this kind of thinking. Oh, what? So you think I should get fired because my people did so? That's not what I said. What I said is, if you are not modeling and living up to the values and holding people accountable to the values and taking responsibilities, let me give you a practical example of this. Okay. Because it's easy to talk about it and then go, oh, yeah, Christopher, well, when have you done this? So let me share an example of this. Okay. When I've been in large organizations, I very much set the tone for my teams that we have a way of operating and that someone doesn't get to subvert our way of operating just because they hold a position of power or because they happen to be friends with so and so or whatever. Now, I will tell you right now, that is not a popular position to have. And I have had teams over the years who are terrified when I make this as a pronouncement to the team that this is our operating model. This is how we work. And I don't care if the CEO himself or herself calls you. You work through this, and if you need to escalate it, you escalate it. And depending on the position, you can escalate it directly to me if you really think it's necessary. But this is how it works. And people are very afraid of that because historically, leaders will make claims like this. Then said important, powerful person comes, doesn't get what they want, throws a fit, and then the leader throws that person under the bus and says, yeah, well, they really should have done that. I can't believe that they didn't give you what you needed. Oh, and then they go, and then they gaslight the person into going, well, that was your fault. You should have known that. And the person's going, you said, follow the process. You said, stick to this. So I will say it's always a tense moment when I start implementing these things with my teams because people are like, is Christopher really going to back us in this? Or is he going to cut out the second it gets hot for him and let us take the fall? And so I have multiple examples of this where my teams have really made some very powerful people angry because they are used to just getting what they want and assuming that when they don't get what they want, they can just come scream at, that leader or whoever. And rather than that leader taking responsibility for it, they'll just throw their person under the bus. And I've seen leaders literally fire people for doing what they told them to do so that they didn't have to take responsibility for it. And it disgusts me. And so naturally, this does not always go well. And I've had people who I've had to hold accountable for not following through on that because they were afraid I wasn't going to back them. And I've had to say, no, I said, follow the process. And if they don't like that, you escalate. And you escalate it all the way to me if you need it. And once people realize that I'm serious about it things move smoother. But let me tell you, that is not easy when you're getting raked over the coals by either a peer or someone a click above you, because I've been 2 clicks, 1 click from the CEO before where people yelling at you are very powerful people and they have the power to get you fired. And they're going, I didn't get what I want. And I've had to be the one to go, yeah, I know. And that's at my direction. So if you have an issue with that, then let's talk this through. And if you're really going to be mad at somebody, don't be mad at my person. They are following my instructions. And I have gone head to head with this type of thing. And I can tell you right now, it would be a heck of a lot easier for me just to throw my people under the bus and say, yeah, well, John, Jen, what they should have known. This was an easy thing. But I don't. And even if I am like, they probably could have handled it differently, then I will deal with that privately with that person. But I won't do it until I understand their side of the story and say, hey, let's go on. Help me understand what happened. Is there anything we could have done differently? Type of thing. And then take responsibility for that, but not just back down. And I can just tell you right now, that is not the norm in leadership right now. And I don't tell that story to go, oh, look at me, I'm such a great leader. That's not my point. What I'm saying is, I know how hard it is to do that. And I know how much pressure there is to not do that. And culture right now is pushing everybody to say leaders shouldn't have to be accountable. They can just throw their people under the bus. They can just do what they want. And so what it leads to is then leaders get really good. If they think they can do this the right way and get away with it, what they'll do is they'll do things to subtly set their people up. And I talk to people all the time where they feel like this is the environment that they're in right now. They feel like I'm being told this, but I literally feel like I'm being set up to be lit on fire at the drop of a hat. And it's like, well, right, because we are creating an environment where leaders believe so long as I can keep my hands clean, I'm actually not responsible. And so I'll create systems and say things with a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And I'll put the PowerPoint up that says, this is our leadership values, while motivating and incentivizing and driving behaviors that are contrary to that, so that when things go sideways, I can point to this thing over here and then go, shame, shame on the person who actually was doing what I was strongly suggesting was the way to do it. And it's got to stop. It truly has to stop. And if you're a leader who is hearing this and maybe a little mad, but kind of going, crap, that's me, change course. Work with your teams on where this is happening. Ask honest questions. And because quite frankly, and maybe I'll just kind of wrap with this, if you aren't willing to stand up and take responsibility for the things you actually believe and the things you think need to get done and the way things need to happen, if you aren't willing to take the heat for that, you're not a leader. You're a coward. And there's just no other way to put it, is that that's really all you are. You're a coward who has a title, and that's it. And you are not effective. You are destroying your teams. You are hurting the people around you. And at some point, it will catch up with you. And you might think it won't. And you'll probably go to great lengths to make sure it doesn't happen. But at some point, you will be held accountable. You can't escape accountability forever. At some point, it's coming. It will come for you. And when it does, the longer you've been playing this game, the harder the hammer is going to fall on you. And so while you might go, yeah, but I'm in too deep now, it's like, well, so what? You're going to keep digging? That's your solution? Just keep digging and hope that maybe if you dig deep enough, you'll be far enough down that you can miss the blast? Doesn't work that way. Deeper you go, the more that's going to fall on your head when it finally does come time. And so you're better off coming clean, moving forward. And like I said, this does not mean you are accountable for every single thing your people do. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about. You're going to have people who make stupid decisions on their own. They're going to go off and do something, and it's a teaching moment. And there may be times that it comes to a point where it goes, listen, I now have to hold you accountable. And there have been people I've had to dismiss from my teams because I've said, you are not upholding the values and the things that we say we operate by. And you have a choice. You can either follow it or you can work somewhere else. And that's not a fun conversation, but yes, there are times that you have to do that. And you don't get to go, well, they're just a difficult employee. So when they go, sideways, that's not really me. That is you. That is you if you allow it. You are just as culpable as they are if you know it's happening and you're allowing it. So don't be a coward. If you're going to be a leader, hold yourself accountable, take responsibility for the things that you do and the people that you lead. And if you're not willing to do that, then step down. That's all there is to it. So with that, I hope you have a great rest of your week. I hope you found this helpful. And I will see you on the other side.